Unaware his wife was pregnant with triplets and had just become the heir to a $100 million fortune, Ethan Adebayo dragged Grace out to the driveway of their Lekki mansion and told her she no longer belonged there. To him, she was a spiritual mistake, a barren woman who had turned his home into a shrine of anointing oil, fertility teas, and unanswered prayers. He believed he was upgrading his life, swapping the quiet wife in a red dress for the glamorous woman in green who made him feel young and powerful again. But as he pointed toward the gate and Vanessa laughed at Grace's tears, he didn't know 3 tiny hearts were already beating under that same red dress, carrying his surname in their blood. He didn't know that the same week he signed away their marriage, a lawyer in Enugu had signed papers that made Grace richer than his entire real estate dream. So, what happens when the man who boasted that he escaped a barren curse discovers she was never empty at all? When the woman he pushed into the street returns with 3 children and $100 million behind her name. And what will Ethan do when he realizes Grace's next move is not to beg for love, but to decide his future? Grace Nwankwo Adebayo once believed that a patient wife could hold a home together with just prayer and endurance. Her mother had told her that men wander, tempers change, seasons shift, but a wise woman keeps kneeling until God answers. So, when the pregnancy test stayed stubbornly negative month after month, Grace didn't shout at heaven. She swallowed herbs from Enugu aunties, paid for blood tests in Victoria Island, and woke up for midnight prayers while Ethan snored through every whispered scripture. Their story had started like something out of a soft Nollywood love story. A crowded church wedding in Enugu, rice raining down like blessings, honeymoon photos at Elegushi Beach, plans whispered over roasted corn, and Sia about buying land from the island to the mainland. When his property business in Lagos began to rise, she followed him with a full heart, believing that success would only tighten their bond. Instead, the higher his profile climbed, the smaller he made her feel. Slowly, marriage turned her into background noise. She became the woman behind the curtains of their Lekki duplex, cooking the meals that fueled his meetings, ironing the shirts he wore to impress investors, sending him prayer messages before every presentation. Each new month ended the same way: one pink line on the test strip, a polite shrug from the doctor, and the heavy silence of Ethan's disappointment filling the house like smoke. The doctors said her body looked fine. One gentle gynecologist in Ikoyi mentioned stress, rest, and faith. Ethan heard something else entirely. "So it's you," he said one evening, eyes glued to his buzzing phone. "Every guy I know has children. Me, I went and married bad luck." From that night, the word barren clung to Grace like a smell she could not wash out. His mother's eyes lingered too long on her flat stomach at Christmas. Cousins made careless jokes about adoption and Plan B. Every silence at the dining table felt like a verdict. The night he finally decided she was no longer worth the wait, the sky over Lekki was heavy with rain. There was no shouting, no broken plates, no neighbors watching from their balcony. Just the quiet cruelty of a man who had already moved on. The divorce papers sat in the center of their glass coffee table, perfectly aligned, as if they had always belonged there. Ethan stood over them in his blue shirt, face flat, as thunder rumbled in the distance. "I can't waste my years on a woman who can't give me a child," he said, as if reading a line he had rehearsed. "My lawyer will finish the process. I'll leave you at this house for now. It's the least I can do." His phone lit up again. Vanessa's name flashed on the screen, her picture a perfect smile and long straight wig. He picked up his overnight bag, adjusted his wristwatch, and walked out without looking back. The gate closed with a dull clang that echoed through Grace's chest. She didn't scream. She didn't chase him to the car park. She simply stood by the living room window, watching rain streak down the glass in long, trembling lines. Her left hand pressed lightly against the small, unfamiliar fullness of her belly, a curve she had blamed on stress and too much bread. She didn't know that beneath her fingers, 3 fragile hearts were already learning the rhythm of the storm. By morning, the rain had washed the streets clean, but nothing inside the house felt new. Papers waited on the table. His ring lay beside them, a silent joke. The security guard didn't meet her eyes. It was only later, after the pain settled into a heavy numbness, that she began to pack the pieces of her life into one small suitcase. And that was how she ended up on the driveway in the hot Lagos sun, in a red maternity dress that now felt too tight, with a suitcase in one hand and the other clamped protectively over her stomach. Ethan stood on the steps of the duplex like a landlord evicting a stranger, pointing toward the gate with the same hand that had once slipped a ring onto her finger. Beside him, Vanessa in a sleek green dress laughed softly, as if watching a scene from a movie she'd already seen the ending of. "Grace, carry your things and go," Ethan said, loud enough for the security guard and the neighbor's curtains to hear. "I can't be held down by you anymore. I need a real family." The guard stared at the floor. The sun felt hotter. Something twisted sharply inside her belly, a reminder that she wasn't alone, that 3 unseen witnesses were listening to every word. Grace didn't argue. She didn't list the nights she stayed awake praying for him, or the deals she had fasted over so his company wouldn't collapse. She tightened her grip on the suitcase handle, swallowed the taste of iron at the back of her throat, and walked slowly toward the open gate. What Ethan didn't know was that inside the belly he despised, 3 lives were turning, stretching, quietly choosing their mother's strength over their father's pride. And somewhere, far from the polished tiles of their Lekki compound, an elderly lawyer in Enugu was putting the final touches on a document that would place a century-old fortune in the hands of the same woman he had just cast out. Grace didn't look back as she walked past the estate gate. The wheels of her small suitcase rattled softly against the pavement, a fragile soundtrack to the collapse of everything she once believed was permanent. She felt that strange flutter again low in her abdomen, a tight pull, almost like a whisper from inside, but she pressed her palm against it, steadying herself. She told herself it was stress, exhaustion, the weight of humiliation settling into her bones. She didn't yet know it was 3 tiny lives fighting to stay alive inside her. Behind her, the mansion door slammed, followed by Vanessa's bright laughter. It echoed down the driveway like a victory song. Grace kept walking. That night, she checked into a short-let apartment in Lekki Phase 1, a quiet space with a stiff mattress and humming air conditioner. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the soft glow of the bedside lamp. She replayed the moment Ethan pointed at her belly, at her suitcase, at the gate. As if she were a stranger trespassing on land she once swept, prayed over, and built a home inside. The humiliation was sharp, but beneath it was something heavier, older. A grief she had never been able to name. She barely slept. Her body felt foreign, tired, swollen, tender. Morning came with dizzy spells that sent her gripping the bathroom sink, breathing through nausea that rose like a wave. She brushed it off as stress again. Her life had shattered in 24 hours. Anyone would feel sick. But the dizziness didn't stop. 3 days after being thrown out, Grace collapsed. It happened in the kitchen of the apartment, her hand reaching for a glass of water before her knees buckled. Her vision blurred, spots of white dancing in front of her. When she woke up, she was in the back of an Uber heading to a hospital in Ikoyi, her neighbor looking panicked beside her. "Madam, you fainted," he whispered. The ride felt endless. Her hands trembled. The fluttering in her belly had grown stronger, almost rhythmic. She whispered a prayer under her breath, part fear, part instinct. At the Ikoyi clinic, the nurse guided her to an examination bed. Blood pressure cuff. Questions. Tests. A soft reassurance. "You'll be fine, just relax." But the doctor's expression changed when he returned. He held the scan like something fragile. "Madam Grace," he said slowly, almost reverently, "you are pregnant." The words hit her like wind. Her lips parted, breath stilled. "Pregnant," she whispered, as if the syllables were foreign. "Yes. And not with one." He turned the screen toward her. 3 small forms glowed on the ultrasound, tiny clusters, each with a flicker of life pulsing steadily. "You are carrying triplets." For a long moment, the world went silent. No humming machines, no footsteps in the hallway, just 3 beating hearts filling the room with a miracle she could barely comprehend. Grace covered her mouth with both hands as tears streamed down her face. After years of shame, Nights of prayer, months of accusations. 3 lives had chosen this moment. After Ethan walked away, after she was discarded like refuse, to announce themselves. A soft laugh broke from her chest, half sobbing, half disbelieving. Triplets. 3. 3 blessings she hadn't been allowed to dream of. The doctor continued speaking about rest, nutrition, monitoring, but she could barely hear him. Her mind was racing to Ethan's voice, the last thing he said to her. I can't waste my youth on a woman who can't give me a child. If she had told him the truth, he would have run back. He would have dragged her into another performance of love, not because he wanted her, but because he wanted an heir. 3 heirs. 3 trophies. 3 proofs that he wasn't the problem. No. Her children would not grow up as bargaining chips. They would not be raised in a house where their mother was belittled, blamed, or abandoned at will. She pressed her palm against her stomach again, this time with a fierce, protective tenderness. These babies will know peace, she whispered. She meant it. 2 weeks later, Grace received the phone call that would tilt her world again. Your father has passed. Chief Arins Nwankwo. Her anchor. Her quiet protector. The only man who ever called her my sunshine without irony. Grief punched through her chest so suddenly she dropped the phone. She traveled to Enugu with slow steps, each movement heavy with loss and swelling pregnancy. At the compound, relatives whispered behind their wrappers. She came alone? Where is her husband? That marriage didn't last. She ignored them. The day of the will reading arrived. The long mahogany table. The lawyer clearing his throat. Inheritance lists, houses, shares, companies being allocated like puzzle pieces. Then, to my daughter, Grace Nwankwo Adebayo, I leave my controlling shares and assets in Wellington Holdings, valued at approximately $100 million. Silence fell like a dropped stone. A cousin coughed in shock. An aunt blinked rapidly. Someone muttered, 100 what? Grace just stared at the document. Her father's signature. The company's seal. Her name beside a number that looked unreal even on paper. A shift happened inside her. A quiet, seismic shift. She wasn't the discarded wife anymore. She wasn't barren. She wasn't empty. She was a mother-to-be carrying triplets. And she was the inheritor of $100 million empire. As she signed the acknowledgement forms, she felt her babies move, 3 soft nudges, as if marking the moment their futures changed. When she returned to Lagos days later, she stood outside the Lekki house Ethan once owned, looking at the walls where she cried, prayed, and waited for a man who blamed her for everything. The gate was closed now. The driveway felt small, suffocating. Grace looked up at the house, exhaled, and whispered, I'm not the same woman you left here. She wasn't. She carried life. She carried wealth. She carried power Ethan didn't even know existed. And this was only the beginning. The Lekki duplex Ethan left behind felt different the moment Grace stepped inside again. The rooms were still arranged exactly as she left them. The blue throw pillows she fluffed every morning, the framed honeymoon photo on the wall, the quiet echo of prayers she once whispered into the corners of the house. Yet everything felt hollow now. Like walking through the skeleton of a life she is no longer recognized. She paused in the living room, eyes lingering on the glass table where he once placed the divorce papers. Rain had fallen that night. Now sunlight is filtered through the curtains, touching the same spot with a gentleness that mocked the violence of memory. Her hand drifted to her belly, rounded now, unmistakably showing. The triplets moved softly beneath her palm, tiny reminders that she wasn't alone, not anymore. She looked around and breathed a final decision into the air. I'm done with this place. The house felt too small for the new version of her. Too heavy with shame. Too saturated with Ethan's voice, Ethan's anger, Ethan's shadow. She wouldn't raise her children within walls that once heard her cry. Within a week, she leased the house through an agent and moved into a secure penthouse in Ikoyi, high above the noise, the gossip, and the ghosts. The space was bright, airy, and silent enough for her to dream again. That move marked the beginning. The beginning of a woman the world would one day whisper about. Madam G. Wellington. At first, The transformation was slow, born from necessity, not ambition. She met with her father's lawyer, Mr. Obi, a meticulous man with silver hair and a voice that carried quiet authority. He explained the structure of Wellington Holdings, the international accounts, the subsidiaries, the dormant companies that only needed the right spark. Grace listened carefully. Then she asked for control. Not partial control. Full. What followed were weeks of restructuring. New boards. New legal arrangements. New signatures carrying her name instead of her father's. Every document she signed erased a little more of the woman who once tiptoed around Ethan's moods. She dropped Adebayo from her public identity. She used her father's legacy as her shield. She chose a new corporate name, one that referenced her past but hid her completely. Madam G. Wellington. A woman who did not grant interviews. A woman who never attended events without purpose. A woman nobody connected to the barren ex-wife Ethan had discarded. She built a small team. Mr. Obi, the lawyer. Tund, the brilliant young financial analyst with a mind sharp enough to predict market storms. And Amara, a discreet PA who understood the power of silence. Together, they began to reposition Wellington Holdings. Grace invested in Yaba tech hubs, struggling construction companies, small banks looking for stability. Every deal she approved was careful, strategic, and purposeful. And somewhere in the spreadsheets and balance sheets, Ethan's name reappeared. On the surface, Ethan and Vanessa were building a glamorous life. Champagne brunches at Eco Hotel, vacations in Dubai, Instagram posts captioned, "My Forever." The blogs called them Lagos' newest power couple. Behind the scenes, Ethan's company was expanding too fast. He was borrowing heavily, taking loans from private lenders and celebrating victories built on unstable foundations. He welcomed foreign investors with open arms, desperate for the appearance of success. He didn't know that one of the biggest foreign investors funding his new estate project was actually Wellington Holdings, hidden behind 3 shell corporations, layered like fine silk. Grace read every report about him, without a flicker of expression. She refused to feel anything. No anger, no longing, no satisfaction. Feelings, she told herself, are luxuries I can't afford. But sometimes, late at night, she would pause while reviewing documents and place one hand on her belly. The triplets kicked often, like they knew she was working for them, building something larger than revenge, building safety. The months passed and Grace's pregnancy became heavier. Her steps slowed. Her doctor insisted on limited travel, so meetings were held in the penthouse or virtual. Her team adapted. She learned to manage an empire from a reclining chair, sipping tea, and reviewing contracts with swollen feet and determination carved into her bones. Meanwhile, Ethan's world appeared flawless. Pictures of him and Vanessa filled social media, him lifting her during a beach kiss, her wearing a ring that wasn't hers yet, both of them flaunting a life built on illusions. Ethan bragged to friends that he had upgraded, that he had escaped bad luck, that his ex-wife was probably somewhere, still praying for one line to turn into 2. Grace swallowed the bitterness whenever she saw these posts. Not because she still wanted him. No, those days were long dead. What stung was the memory of who she had been in those photo shadows, a woman too quiet, too forgiving, too willing to shrink. Not anymore. The day her water broke, Lagos was wrapped in the hum of evening traffic. She was rushed to a private hospital in Ikoyi, escorted by her security detail. The delivery was long, hours stretching into a blur of pain and light, sweat and whispered prayers. Then came the cries. 3 of them. Her entire world rearranged itself in those sounds. 2 boys. 1 girl. Chitty. Daniel. Zara. Tiny fists. Tiny breaths. 3 miracles lined up beside her like promises fulfilled at last. She held them with trembling arms, tears soaking their blankets. "You will never know the pain I knew," she whispered. "You'll grow in love, not in lack." For the first time, she felt whole. A week later, as she rocked her newborns in the penthouse nursery, Tund entered with a new financial report. "Madam," he said quietly, Ethan Adebayo's company just secured major financing for the Adebayo Towers project. Grace didn't look up. Good for him. Tund hesitated. The financing is mostly from us. She stilled. Wellington Holdings had become his backbone. Grace smiled faintly, calm, unreadable. Then let him build, she whispered. The triplets slept peacefully in her arms. He has no idea the ground beneath his feet belongs to me. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here, quiet, patient, and wearing her name. Ethan Adebayo believed the world was finally bending in his favor. His new estate projects were splashed across glossy billboards along the Lekki Expressway. His Instagram page grew faster than the foundations of the buildings he claimed were changing Lagos real estate forever. Industry blogs called him a rising mogul. Investors flocked to him. And beside him, always smiling, always adjusting her wig for the cameras, was Vanessa, his queen, the woman he claimed had resurrected his destiny. Yet for all his confidence, he didn't know his empire was standing on financial stilts, thin, fragile, borrowed stilts held quietly in place by the same woman he once dragged to the gate with a suitcase and a breaking heart. He didn't know that Wellington Holdings, operating under quiet shell corporations, had become one of the largest creditors funding his dreams. He didn't know Grace's shadow was already moving through the cracks of his foundation. Grace studied Ethan's progress from the penthouse office in Ikoyi as she rocked her newborn daughter, Zara, gently in her lap. It was a strange thing, how life could fracture and reform in such a short time. Just months earlier, she was the humiliated wife in a red dress. Now she was a mother of 3 and the silent puppeteer of financial strings Ethan danced on without knowing. Her analyst, Tund, placed a stack of documents in front of her. "Madam, these are the updated reports on Adebayo properties." Grace raised an eyebrow. "Give me the highlights." "He's expanding too quickly," Tund said, leaning heavily on interest-based loans and short-term financing. "If any investor pulls out, even one." He tapped the table gently. The entire structure collapses. Grace looked down at her sleeping daughter. "And which investors does he depend on the most?" Tund hesitated, then smiled knowingly. "Us." Grace felt the tug in her chest, not revenge, not satisfaction, something more complicated. For years she had been powerless under Ethan's anger, suffocating beneath his accusations. But now power sat in her palms like warm oil, slippery and dangerous. She had to handle it with care. Still, she said nothing. She simply nodded and adjusted Zara's blanket. Ethan, meanwhile, hosted meetings in skyscraper conference rooms, bragging about foreign investments he barely understood. He shook hands with bankers who smiled too politely, whispered into phone calls with lenders he'd never met in person, and signed contracts he never read beyond the first page. His partners warned him to slow down. Vanessa encouraged him to go faster. "Baby," she said one night over wine at a rooftop bar, "if you build this Adebayo Towers project, nobody can look down on you again. You'll be in the same league as the big boys." He smiled, imagining headlines, imagining respect, imagining a world where he was celebrated instead of pitted. He didn't know those big boys already feared the new investor in town, Madam G. Wellington, the same woman whose initials he once erased from his heart. Grace's life was different now. Softer but sharper. She moved through motherhood and empire building with a dual focus that surprised even her. While she nursed Chitty, she reviewed loan schedules. While Daniel slept on her chest, she signed contracts. At night, when all 3 children slept like tiny angels, she'd sit on the penthouse balcony, listening to the hum of Lagos and wondering how long before Ethan's carelessness collided with her new reality. She didn't want revenge, but she would protect her children at all costs. Protection sometimes looked like power. One afternoon, Grace attended an exclusive investor brunch at a Victoria Island hotel, one of the few public events she allowed herself to be seen at. Her gown was modest, elegant, and her face partially shielded by a soft, angled hat. She moved like someone untouchable, a ghost of wealth. Halfway through the event, she froze. Across the room, laughing, glass in hand, arm around Vanessa, stood Ethan. His suit shimmered under the lights. His smile was wide. He looked confident, inflated by ego and attention. He didn't recognize her. Why would he? The woman in that red dress had died the day he closed the gate on her. Grace lowered her gaze, but her chest tightened. Not with longing, not hurt, with something like clarity, an understanding that fate was stitching their paths back together not by accident, but by design. She turned to leave, but a conversation caught her attention. A group of bankers were whispering near the bar. This Adebayo guy is over-leveraged. His Ikoyi project? Too risky. Unless his largest creditor stays in, he's finished. Grace's heartbeat slowed. Largest creditor. Her. For the first time, she saw the full map of Ethan's future laid before her. Every road, every risk, every cliff. And right in the center of that intricate, gleaming web was Wellington Holdings. Her company. Her father's legacy. Her children's inheritance. Ethan didn't know he was standing on a ground she could turn to dust with a signature. She walked out of the event, each step echoing against the polished hotel tiles. Outside, her driver opened the door. Home, Ma. She paused, looking out at the Lagos skyline, the cranes, the towers, the unfinished dreams rising like monuments of human ambition. No, she said softly, to the office. Because she needed to see one thing. How much of Ethan Adebayo she already owned. That evening, in her office surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows and the city lights below, Mr. Obi handed her one final document. Madam Grace, he said gently, with one move, you can pull the thread that unravels everything he has built. Grace stared at the document long enough for the ink to blur. She didn't sign it. Not yet. Instead, she whispered, almost to herself, when I move, I won't miss. And in that quiet moment, the web tightened, silent, invisible, deadly. Lagos glittered that night. Floodlights washed the entrance of the Grand Meridian Hotel in Victoria Island, where the annual Property and Power Gala was underway, an event known for its diamonds, egos, and the kind of networking where smiles were sharper than knives. Chauffeurs opened doors for billionaires. Long gowns swept the marble floors like rivers of silk. Soft high-life music drifted through the hall, blending with the clinking of champagne. Inside, Ethan Adebayo felt untouchable. He stood near the stage, wearing a navy tuxedo that hugged his ambition perfectly. Cameras flashed as he posed with Vanessa, who wore an emerald green dress that shimmered every time she turned. She clung to his arm, chin lifted, eyes sparkling with the satisfaction of a woman who believed she had finally won. Tonight will be unforgettable, Vanessa whispered, kissing his cheek. And historic, Ethan replied, adjusting his cufflinks. By this time next year, they will call me the face of Lagos real estate. Across the hall, unnoticed, Grace entered. She moved quietly, dressed in a sleek black gown with minimal jewelry, nothing flashy, nothing loud. Her hair was pinned in a soft updo, framing a face that had changed from the woman Ethan once knew. There was no softness for him to exploit. No hesitation for him to dismiss. Only a cool, poised grace that made people turn without understanding why. Her seating card read, G. Wellington, major investor. And indeed, the staff treated her as such, ushering her to the high table, offering her respect, guiding her with the subtle reverence given to powerful silent financiers. Ethan did not recognize her when she walked past the red carpet. Even if he had looked directly at her, his mind would never have connected Madam G. Wellington, the invisible giant funding half the night's sponsors, to the woman he once threw out with a suitcase. Grace sat, expression calm, hands resting gently on her lap. She didn't come to start a war. But wars have a way of finding those they were meant for. As the hall filled, murmurs swirled. Who is the Wellington woman? So elegant. She funded the youth tech program, right? I heard she controls serious money. Grace listened quietly, sipping water, her face unreadable. She had not intended to draw attention. But power had a scent, and the room smelled it. When Ethan and Vanessa approached the high table for introductions, Grace kept her gaze down, adjusting her napkin. Good evening, Madam Wellington. The host began warmly. May I introduce Mr. Ethan Adebayo? Ethan stepped forward. His smile froze. The napkin slipped slowly from Grace's fingers. She lifted her face just enough. Their eyes met. Recognition struck Ethan like an electric current. He blinked twice, as if the air between them had lied.
Gee.
Grace. Vanessa's eyes widened with confusion. Then amusement. Then malice. Grace gave a polite, distant nod. Good evening. The host, oblivious to the tension, continued smiling. Madam Wellington is one of the major sponsors of tonight's charity initiative. We are honored to. But the words dissolved into the buzz rising around the table. Ethan swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. Seeing Grace glowing, elegant, magnetic, stirred something he didn't expect. Embarrassment. Maybe even fear. Vanessa leaned close to Ethan. Your ex? This is her. The edge in her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Grace looked away, refusing to engage. She didn't owe him a moment. She didn't owe Vanessa a glance. But humiliation travels like wildfire, and Vanessa carries matches. It happened during the wine toast. As waiters moved between tables offering champagne, Vanessa glided behind Grace with a glass of red wine, her smile bright with performance. Oh, Grace, she said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. I didn't expect to see you here. I thought you avoided events like this. The crowd might overwhelm you. Grace turned slightly. I manage fine. Really? Vanessa said. You know, some women just aren't built for big tables. Or big responsibilities. Or big families. A few people exchanged awkward glances. Grace did not blink. Enjoy your evening. Vanessa stepped closer. Then, deliberate as a dancer, she tilted her wrist. The red wine cascaded across Grace's gown like a wound opening. Gasps rippled through the hall. A few phones lifted discreetly. Ethan barked a soft laugh, shaking his head. Grace, honestly, how clumsy. Grace froze in place, the cold liquid dripping down her dress, staining the elegance she had so carefully chosen. The pianist stopped playing. In that silence, Vanessa smiled. Wide, victorious. She still attracts embarrassment, Vanessa said sweetly. Some things never change. Ethan laughed again, louder. Exactly why I left, always messy. Grace rose slowly. Not a tear. Not a tremble. Not a word. She looked around the room, at the faces judging her, mocking her, pitying her, then walked out with her head lifted, the spilled wine glistening like a badge of dishonor down her dress. The humiliation was absolute. And the silence she left behind was louder than any scream. In the marble bathroom, Grace stood before the mirror. She wiped her dress softly with a towel, her movements slow, deliberate. Her reflection stared back, wine-stained, humiliated yet unbroken. Pain surged in her chest. Then something else rose with it. A quiet, controlled fire. A fire with memory. A fire with strategy. A fire with 3 children to protect. She whispered to her reflection, voice steady. Enough. She stepped back, took a deep breath, and pulled out her phone. Her voice was cold steel when she spoke. Tunned. Obi. Pull everything. Every loan. Every collateral. Every guarantee is tied to Adebayo properties. I want a full report by morning. She ended the call. Her humiliation had been the match. Now she would become the wildfire. And Ethan Adebayo, the man who mocked her womb, her worth, her existence, would soon learn that the storm he created had finally opened its eyes. Lagos woke up buzzing. Billboards across Eco-Atlantic screamed with the same announcement. Adebayo Properties unveils the Azure Towers, the future of African luxury. Drone shots flooded social media. Influencers rehearsed captions. Vanessa spent the morning rehearsing her red carpet walk in front of the mirror while Ethan adjusted his cufflinks, practicing the smile he would give the governor. It was the biggest day of his career. The day he would stand above every competitor, every family member who doubted him, every man who joked that he married barren luck. And somewhere inside that same city, Grace tightened the straps of her heels, placed 2 final signed documents into her purse, and prepared to tear down everything he had built on her name. The sky was too bright for what was coming. The launch venue looked like a palace made of glass. A blue carpet rolled from the entrance all the way to the stage. Security men ushered guests in through metal detectors that glinted under the sunlight. Champagne towers sparkled. The press waited eagerly, their cameras poised like hungry eyes ready to feast. Vanessa arrived first, glittering in a silver gown, rings flashing like stars. "Tonight is our night," she said, squeezing Ethan's hand. "Everyone will know your name." "They already know my name," Ethan replied smugly. "Today just proves the prophecy." His arrogance was a second skin. Backstage, he rehearsed his speech about legacy, empire, and generational wealth. He didn't know someone else now owned the strings holding his empire upright.
Not yet.
While guests settled, Grace entered through a private door arranged by her lawyer. She wore an all-black pantsuit, sleek, expensive, authoritative. No gown this time. No softness. No space to bleed. Her entrance turned heads, not because they recognized her face, but because power has a gravity that pulls attention without permission. Beside her walked Mr. Obi, carrying 2 sealed folders and Tund, holding a tablet full of numbers sharp enough to cut through concrete. They took their seats quietly in the 3rd row. Grace looked at the stage. At Ethan. At Vanessa. Her heartbeat did not rise. She was ready. When the governor arrived, the hall erupted in applause. Flashbulbs detonated. The MC took the stage, hyping the crowd with dramatic precision. "Ladies and gentlemen, today marks a new era in Lagos real estate. Adebayo Properties presents the architectural marvel of the decade, the Azure Towers." The crowd roared. Ethan stepped out, Vanessa at his side, smiling like a victorious queen. Pride soaked every step he took. Grace watched, face expressionless. He began his speech grand, loud, full of empty lines about humility and gratitude. Then came the moment that mattered. The signing ceremony. For long tables were carried onto the stage. On them, contracts, checks, documents worth billions. Cameras zoomed in. "Before we unveil the first tower," Ethan declared, "our lead investor will sign the final approval. The international financing is secure, and after the signature, construction begins." People clapped. Grace rose. Quietly, deliberately. She walked toward the stage, heels clicking like a countdown. The hall shifted. Heads turned. Vanessa frowned. Ethan's smile faltered. The MC hesitated. "Madam, can we assist you?" Grace stepped onto the stage with calm authority. "Mr. Obi and Tund followed, handing her the folders. She took the mic. Her voice was soft, but every word carried like thunder. "My name is G. Wellington. Major creditor. Primary financier. Owner of the controlling debt that keeps Adebayo Properties standing." Silence fell like a hammer. Tund tapped a button on the tablet. Documents flashed across the giant LED screen. Loan structures. Funding channels. Interest triggers. Default clauses. All leading back to Wellington Holdings. Ethan's skin drained of color. "Madam Wellington," he stuttered. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake," Grace replied, eyes steady. "Ethan, you are in breach of 12 major contractual obligations." The audience gasped. Grace turned to the watching dignitaries. "As of this morning, Adebayo Properties is insolvent. Your founder leveraged his entire empire on funds he did not understand and has now defaulted." Vanessa grabbed Ethan's arm. "Ethan, say something. Fix this." But Ethan could only stare, mouth open, mind collapsing under the weight of the truth. "My team," Grace continued, "has notified the banks. All financing is frozen. All assets under review. And no new deals can proceed without my approval." Gasps exploded across the hall. "That includes Azure Towers." The room thundered with whispers, shock, disbelief. Ethan lunged forward. "Who the hell do you think you are? How can you?" "I can," Grace said calmly, "because you signed for funding without reading the fine print." Her eyes narrowed. "Because you thought investors were faceless. Because you believed you were untouchable." She stepped closer. And because you once threw a pregnant woman out of your home without knowing who she carried or what she would one day own. Ethan froze. Completely. Vanessa's grip loosened. Grace held his gaze without blinking, without pity. That woman, she finished, now holds everything you bragged about. Whispers swept across the hall in violent waves. Phones went up. Reporters pushed forward. The MC had no words left. Grace handed the mic to the stunned organizer. Please proceed. The launch is officially suspended. Then she turned and walked off the stage with the same quiet, unstoppable dignity she carried into it. Behind her, Ethan shouted her name, tripping over cables, chasing a past that no longer wanted him. But the cameras were already capturing the real story. The fall of Adebayo Properties. The rise of Wellington Holdings. And the mysterious woman who brought a king to his knees. Outside, the sun was setting. Grace stepped into her waiting car, the city glowing behind her. For the first time in a long time, she exhaled. One battle remained, and Ethan Adebayo was about to face it at her gate. The fall did not happen in one night. It happened in the headlines, in whispered phone calls, in emails that began with "unfortunately," in boardrooms where Ethan's name once commanded respect and now triggered discomfort. Within 48 hours of the Azure Towers disaster, banks began to call in their loans. Creditors who once begged him to take their money suddenly wanted it back. Partners quietly withdrew. Government officials who had promised full support stopped answering his calls. The same blogs that once hailed him as the king of Lekki bricks now renamed him the man who flew too close to Wellington. Screenshots of Grace's on-stage revelation went viral. Unknown female investor ends billion-naira dream. Mystery Madam W. freezes Adebayo empire. Who really owns Lagos real estate? Vanessa didn't last long. The day the first property was seized, she walked into his half-empty office, removed her things from the desk, and dropped his spare house key on top of a pile of unpaid bills. Ethan, I can't go down with you, she said, adjusting her sunglasses. I didn't sign up for poverty. He begged. He reminded her of the promises, the trips, the rings. She left anyway. The lift doors closed on his reflection, a tired, unshaven man in a wrinkled shirt, holding on to air. For the first time in years, the noise in Ethan's world went quiet. No parties. No cameras. No adoring, baby, I'm proud of you. Just silence, and the crumbling sound of everything he thought he couldn't lose. Weeks passed. The Lekki mansion, once glowing with vanity lights and visitors, felt like a museum of bad decisions. Some rooms were already empty, furniture auctioned off to keep one more creditor at bay. The pool gathered leaves. The generators coughed more than they roared. One evening, as another bank official ended a call with a polite but firm, "There is nothing more we can do, sir," Ethan slumped onto the living room couch and buried his face in his hands. How had it all turned so quickly? In the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw flashes. Grace at the gate with a suitcase. Grace on the stage at Azure Towers. Grace in that black suit, speaking calmly while his world tilted beneath his feet. He remembered the way she looked at him. Not with love, not even with hatred. Just with conclusion. It dawned on him slowly, like a sunrise he didn't want to see. Everything I built was resting on the same woman I threw away. The night he finally went to her gate, the sky broke open. Rain poured over Ikoyi like judgment, soaking the streets, blurring the city lights. Ethan had no driver now, no convoy. He took a taxi he could barely afford, got out one street before, and walked the rest of the way. His once expensive shoes sinking into growing puddles. He had never been to her new home before. The mansion rose behind high, sleek black gates with security cameras blinking in the corners. Subtle, modern, powerful. Not flashy like his own, quite intimidating like its owner. He hesitated. Then he gripped the gate bars and shouted, "Grace." The rain swallowed his voice, then flung it back at him. "Grace, please. Please, I know you're there." Security guards approached cautiously, hands near their radios. "Sir, you can't be here like this." "I need to see her," he snapped, desperation cracking his tone. She knows me. She'll want to see me. They exchanged looks. One of them went inside. The other simply watched Ethan with a mixture of curiosity and pity. The same man whose face had been on property billboards was now standing in the rain like a lost child. From the upstairs balcony, Grace watched. She had heard his voice before the guard reached her. She would recognize that tone anywhere, the same mixture of anger and entitlement he used the night he placed divorce papers on her table. Only now it was soaked in panic. She could have walked away. She could have closed the curtains without a word. But some scenes deserved to be witnessed. She stepped closer to the glass, one hand resting lightly on the balcony rail. Below, Ethan gripped the bars like they were the only thing holding him upright. "Grace," he called again, rain streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. Please. Just talk to me." Lightning flickered across the sky. Behind her, little footsteps padded softly on the polished floor. "Mummy," a small voice asked. She turned. 3 children stood in the doorway of the balcony lounge, 2 boys and a girl, all in matching cartoon pajamas, hair still damp from their evening bath. Daniel clutched a toy car. Chitty held onto a worn stuffed lion. Zara, the smallest, clung to the edge of her mother's robe. "Who is shouting, Mummy?" Zara asked, eyes wide. Grace's gaze softened as she looked at them. They did not know the weight carried in the voice floating through the rain. To them, he was just noise disturbing their bedtime. "A man who made bad choices," she said gently. "Go back to your room. I'll join you soon." Chitty, the observant one, peered toward the window and caught a glimpse of the figure at the gate. "That man looks like me," he murmured without understanding why. Grace's heart pinched, but her face stayed calm. "Go on," she repeated, kissing each of their foreheads. "I'll come and tell you a story before you sleep." They obeyed, the sound of their footsteps fading like the echo of a life she refused to repeat. She stepped out onto the covered balcony, where the rain couldn't touch her. From there, she could see Ethan clearly, knees muddy, shirt clinging to his skin, dignity dissolving with every drop. "Grace," he shouted again, voice breaking. "They've taken everything. The banks, the houses. Vanessa left. Everybody disappeared. You're the only one left who can help me. Please. Please, I'm begging you." The security guard below received a signal in his earpiece, then stepped aside. Ethan looked up. Their eyes met, just like they had the day of the gala, the day of the launch. Only now, Ethan's arrogance was gone. "Grace," he croaked, "I know I hurt you. I know I said terrible things. I was stupid. I was blinded. But we were married once. You loved me once. Have mercy. Help me talk to the banks. Talk to Wellington. Call them off. I'll do anything. Please." For a moment, time held its breath. Then Grace spoke, her voice calm and clear, floating through the rain. "You are talking to Wellington." He flinched as if struck. She continued. "I was Grace, your barren curse, when you slammed a gate like this in my face. Now I am Madam G, Wellington, mother of 3, owner of the empire you nearly gambled away for ego." He sank to his knees fully, mud soaking his trousers. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. I didn't know. I didn't know you were pregnant. I didn't know about the money. I didn't know." "That's the problem," she cut in gently. "You never cared to know. Not about me. Not about what I carried. Not about the weight of your words." He wept, ugly, uncontrolled, loud. "Please, Grace. Help me. I'll do better. I'll be a father. I'll be present. Just don't leave me like this." Something inside her ached at the word father, but it was not for him. It was for the 3 children inside, who deserved better than a man who only came when everything else was gone. "The children," she said quietly, "will know the truth one day. They will know you exist. But they will also know I protected them from your chaos." She took a slow breath. "I don't hate you, Ethan. I'm done hating you. But I will not save you from consequences you built with your own hands." His sobs grew louder. "Please." "No," she finished softly. "You chose when you dragged me to that gate. I am choosing now." She nodded slightly to the guard. The gates began to close. On the ground, Ethan watched the metal wipe her from view, just as he once shut her out of his life. Only this time, there were witnesses. Neighbors peered from balconies. A passing car slowed. Somewhere, a phone captured the image of a man in the rain, begging at a gate that would never open for him again. For the world, it was scandal. For Grace, it was closure. Later that night, the storm eased. The city glowed in quiet reflection as Grace sat at her office desk, overlooking the blurred lights of Okoye and Victoria Island. The Wellington Holdings logo shone softly on a glass plaque beside her. On the couch across the room, her triplets slept tangled under a single blanket, having demanded their story time in Mummy's office. She had told them a lighter tale, one about courage and soft hearts becoming strong. Grace closed the last file of the night. Her phone buzzed with new emails from partners, from charities, from opportunities that had nothing to do with Ethan and everything to do with who she had chosen to become. The world outside still talked about the man who lost his empire. But inside this room, another story mattered more. A woman who turned humiliation into strategy, who turned heartbreak into a fortress, who turned the word barren into a lie buried beneath the footsteps of 3 children and an empire with her name on it. As she switched off her lamp, a final voiceover seemed to settle over her story, like a blessing. Once, Ethan Adebayo called her useless, cursed, empty. Years later, the same woman stood at the center of her own kingdom, triplets at her feet, his future resting not in her hands, but far behind her. Not because she chased revenge, but because she finally chose herself. And in choosing herself, Grace Nwankwo, Madam G. Wellington, became the moral of the folktale every woman in Lagos would one day tell in a whisper. Never despise the woman you see on her knees. You don't know the empire she's about to rise into.